Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Post. Our next guest for this episode is a social media strategist based in Glasgow, Scotland. She currently works as a social media lead and spends most of her free time with her family and her poodle, Ringo. So without further ado, please welcome to the show, Lena Weber-Reed. Lena, are you ready to go behind the post with me?
I totally am, Lena.
Amazing. I can't wait. So I know you're a big advocate for social selling and employee advocacy, and I really can't wait to dive into this conversation with you. But before we do, can you share a brief look at your professional journey?
Yeah, sure. So I've actually worked as a social media specialist for most of my career. I started out in corporate comms and worked as a press officer at the very beginning, and then kind of really pivoted into social media marketing when social media became a thing for companies. So back in the olden days,
Yeah.
where it was mainly Twitter and Facebook. I'm that old, and I've just always loved it and kind of focused my career on it. What I usually do is I'm kind of the first social media marketer in a company. So I've worked for really, really big corporates, but also small startup and scale ups. And yeah, I'm sort of the first social media marketer on the ground. I come in, build up a strategy, build out a team, and kind of set the direction of that company and try to incorporate the whole kind of social media ecosystem into what they're doing.
Wow, amazing. You really build it from the ground up.
Yeah,
Um,
I usually do. I usually do.
wow, amazing. So now what does your role entail?
So I guess a social media lead, and once again, I'm the very first social media marketer in this company. They've never really had a specialist before, so kind of me coming in, understanding what are the problems the business tries to solve at the moment. What's the commercial strategy like, and how can social media help resolve these issues? How can we tie in social media into quite commercial goals, and then strategizing that, trying to figure out, what are the internal capabilities that we need, what's the tech stack, how can we upskill people within the companies so they understand social media, and then just, yeah, again, kind of building out the content, building out the team.
Yeah, we are really speaking our octopus language. We are
Huh?
big fans of social media and the impact it can have on business outcomes. And I know you're so passionate about social selling and its impact. And just to give our listeners just a quick explanation of what social selling is, it's a sales strategy that leverages social media platforms to build relationships and trust with potential customers and your target audience online. So the strategy essentially involves sales teams using their personal accounts in the B2B space. Obviously, LinkedIn is the main one. There's also X/Twitter, whatever you like to call it these days, to reach new prospects, share insights, and engage in meaningful conversations. And the content shared allows sales professionals to build their profiles, thought leaders, and establish trust online. So that's a quick rundown of what it is. And before we get into how marketing is involved in effectively executing the strategy, the first question I want to ask you is, what fueled your passion for social selling?
That's a good one. I think it goes back to this kind of mud wrestling that sales and marketing get dragged into. I feel like sales and marketing are kind of forced to compete for revenue, right? Each kind of function has to prove their worth and kind of bid for budget. So they're always kind of pitched against each other. And I think this is one of the most terrible things that I see happening over and over again, right? Because we marketing and sales work on revenue. That it's the same pipeline. There's no need for this kind of competition. And I always make a point in building really strong relationships with sales, because I need my sales colleagues to buy into social media to really make it work. Because what social media is all about is the audience. The audience notices when there's a discrepancy between the marketing and the sales process, right? So this needs to be aligned. And social selling for me is one of the projects that both sales and marketing can work on, and really see the benefits. And it's often like a foot in the door. Hey, let's work on this project together, and then it leads to more and more collaboration and more kind of exchange of data and insight.
Yeah, I think it's so important. It's said so many times, but sales and marketing, instead of this like competition, they need to be the best of friends. And
100%. Yeah.
yeah, and social selling is such a good strategy to combine those forces because together it can really be a powerhouse. So I know, as I said before, social selling is a sales strategy, but it actually really comes from a marketing initiative. Like they run the program behind the scenes. So what are the fundamental pillars that social media teams need to implement when launching and executing a social selling strategy?
I think the very first step is to understand what you want to achieve, right? How broad is this? How big is it? It will depend on your company, your internal resources, what is your kind of sales target list? It's almost like there are elements of ABM in this, right? Where who are the people you want to influence? um, you need to make sure that you understand who your target audience is, right? If you don't know who you're going after, you're just kind of pumping out content and hope it's going to stick with someone. But you need to be much more strategic than that. So understand what's the scope of it, who are you talking to, and then it's kind of identifying the right kind of salespeople, right? You need to go for people who are actively out there prospecting, right? You need to go for people who work in BD, maybe SDRs who already have a really good understanding of social media. These are the people that you can kind of convert and get on board with. And then it's kind of understanding what platforms are you going to use? How are you going to make this a success? I would also say be very clear on the expectation, right? So this is collaborative project between sales and marketing. What do you want sales to bring to the table, and what are you as a marketer going to bring to the table, right? So, for example, from a seller, you could say, "Hey, I want you to be active on the tool we're using. I would like you to, identify X amount of leads. Please publish content on your own LinkedIn every day." That's what my expectation is. And then in return, I'll optimize your LinkedIn profile with you. I'll train you up on how a LinkedIn works. I'll teach you the algorithm. I'll show you some great examples. If you're not sure how to write an email, let's do it together, right? I'll show you the ropes, basically. I'll set you up for that. That's what I'm going to do. And then lastly, I think it's about how do you track this, right? What are your success metrics and how do you identify that? I think this is really, really important because you need to be able to demonstrate that your investment, your time, it's mainly time investment on the marketing side, but also the SDR's investment is paying off to the business. So how are you going to track the leads that you're generating? How can you attribute them back to the social selling program?
Yeah, definitely. I think what you said is extremely important, especially when you're starting it. You really need to have that engaged cohort that would want to do it. So selectively picking people and a smaller group, then targeting everyone at once to do it will be a
Yeah,
really
exactly.
good way to set it in motion. And then, as you said, building that relationship and that trust and training and helping providing support will really help social media teams get a strategy like this off the ground. This is kind of stating the obvious, but getting the buy-in for social selling from management is probably the most important factor in setting up the strategy. But it's actually something a lot of social media managers are struggling to get to prove the value to their management teams. So when you launched your social selling strategy at your previous company, how did you get that buy-in?
So one of the things we realized that this was a really big Fortune 200 global company, 100,000 employees, right? So we're talking a huge enterprise business. We realized that people in the sales teams globally already had LinkedIn Navigator licenses. That's the kind of tool we mainly used for prospecting. But they were kind of expensing them on their credit cards. There wasn't like an official program. And there wasn't a lot of buy-in because what people could see the expense of it, right? We were spending X amount of money on these tools, but what they couldn't see is the outcome. Like, what does this tool actually enable salespeople to do? So it was a relatively easy pitch that we could go in and say, look, we're going to identify a handful of people who already have these licenses. We will bring these licenses into a formalized program, and we will train them up. We'll do our thing. We'll get them involved, and we'll essentially do a pilot, right? I think we chose maybe 15 people across 5 or 6 different core markets, where we knew the local marketing teams would support as well in terms of, language, in terms of cultural differences to how you would approach social selling. chose these 15 people who were really keen. To be honest, the initial feedback from the salespeople was super positive, right? They want marketing to help. They want to have that support. They are not people who maybe naturally know how to write content on LinkedIn. So for them, for a marketer to come and say, "Oh, you're already doing this. Can I help you?" It was a really positive thing, right? So we built this pilot out. We used existing licenses, so there was no upfront cost involved at all. And then we built out this pilot program. We spent a lot of time in kind of streamlining how we would report this in our sales CRM, so that we would have kind of a dedicated campaign to this program. All the leads generated through this would be recorded on there. We really forced the sales team to be super disciplined on moving these leads along the pipeline into opportunity value, close one, or losing them and kind of giving a reason for it, and then adding them into nurture programs. So just tracking this was incredibly important. And we did this for 6 months. We did a review. We could demonstrate, because we had basically the paper trail, right, on Salesforce, to say, look, it's this opportunity value that we've generated in a relatively short time period. We also ran a survey with the sellers and said, hey, you've been doing this solo for a while now. We've come in, we've changed, we've worked together. Tell us about the difference. Has this made a difference? And the feedback was 100% positive. It was really, from the sales perspective, they really loved the support that marketing could give. And we got some really, really good quotes from some really important kind of sales directors within the business. So putting this all in a nice report saying, look, there's actually X opportunity value in Salesforce that come out of it. Your investment so far has been literally zero. You've not spent any money on it. And we've got all this positive feedback. Can we expand? And then we expanded. But it was really important to kind of establish that pilot first.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies also are using this pilot program, and the fact that you can show the value and you run it in 6 months or a short sprint, and you see that the salespeople are engaged, it's working from a marketing perspective. It really proves the value, and it can help get the buy-in. Because I think sometimes it's almost like a show and tell, like,
yeah,
see it works, and then we'll invest in it, because it is an investment, but it's an investment that is so worthwhile. Just sometimes you need to prove the value before you jump into getting it employer advocacy or social selling tool that can help you do it. So what do you think some of the reasons are that management teams aren't actually buying into the social selling programs? Like, what do you think is holding them back? And then what steps would you advise social media teams to take to prove the value of social selling and social media on sales opportunities and outcomes?
I think it comes back to the value, right? They don't necessarily initially see the value of it. Also, we're talking B2B, right? There are often extremely long sales cycles, right? So there is an element of expectation management where you just have to be realistic and say, look, I don't know, our product average sales cycle is 18 months to, 2 years sometimes even, right? We're not going to be able to give you any direct revenue figures for a long time. That's just realistically not how it's going to work. But, setting out the KPIs that you can measure at the kind of top of the funnel, at the top of this program, right? How many new leads can you find? What kind of, how many opportunities can you create? What's the opportunity value in that? If you can pitch that, if you can, get the buy-in on the understanding that this is what we can demonstrate, and can demonstrate in a tool like Salesforce, where you have access to a report, where you can, we can set up a dashboard, so you can get your exec team to be able to log in at all times and see how this program's developing. I think that's a really good tool of doing it. I think management's often super reluctant to buying like more tools, right? Because most organizations are quite tool heavy, but are these tools actually being used, right? So again, it's kind of like, what are you going to get back in return? The reality is these tools aren't very expensive, though. If you have a fairly expensive product, and if you have a long sales cycle, chances are you do. A monthly investment of, I don't know, $1,000 per license isn't that crazy. It's kind of putting the investment in relationship with the ultimate outcome in terms of revenue figures. But it's also kind of emphasizing this relationship with sales that you're building up. I think that's something that maybe management often don't, necessarily understand how important it is to build out that relationship. I was lucky in that company that we were already building out a really big employee advocacy at the same time, so we could build this in parallel. But
Yeah.
this is perhaps another tip, right? If you're building out an employee advocacy program, think about how you would build in social selling before you kind of roll out that program, kind of make it a part of it, and then you've kind of almost snuck it into your employee program, and it's there already. You just need to activate it.
Yeah, definitely. I think just going off the last thing you said about building it in parallel with employee advocacy and social selling, the route is the same. Your content team is still writing the content. It's just one is to raise brand awareness, employee advocacy, and the other one is to open up more sales opportunities, which is social selling. So building them in parallel are almost like two birds, one stone, right?
Yeah.
And as you were saying, you said really valuable points, and especially that B2B sales cycles are longer. And I think what's so important is realizing that these buyers are on social media right now. They're trading in conversations with sales reps to research on social media. And because these cycles are so long, nurturing these relationships and finding more prospects on social is so crucial to opening more opportunities and closing more deals. And social media is the place where B2B companies can do that now. And especially what you said as well, you said provide the value by showing the results. That's what they need to see, results to know that it's working. So that was just me rounding up everything you said because it was really valuable. There's also another factor that I think is really important to consider with social selling and sales opportunities on social media. It's dark social. So I'm wondering, given everything you've said, what's the value of social media data? And why is it so important for companies not to have these like social engagements? So let's say likes, comments, reposts, all of that kind of information, to not have that sitting in a silo.
That's a really good point. And I think it kind of goes back to a bigger problem that I see that kind of goes beyond social, and it's just across marketing in general, that we don't actually have very good attribution data. And most companies that I know have sort of first touch attribution, maybe last touch, and it just doesn't give you a usable data overview where you could take conclusions and kind of apply it to what you're doing, right? This is one of the big issues that I have. Where is the kind of multi-touch models? Where can you really follow that journey to get a really good understanding? It's just not really in place across the board right now. So we rely on kind of bits of data, right? We can see the kind of social data that, as he's saying, the kind of what's the engagement figures, the impressions, what are the post shares that give us an idea, and is the content performing? Are we reaching the right audience? But how can we embed this then with other kind of data, right? So website data, for example, where do people come from? Are we pushing traffic? Is this relevant traffic or not? What's the behavior on websites? Where do they go? I think the richer the picture is that you can paint, the more kind of accurate your understanding is of social media influence. The reality is that I've recently had a conversation with a friend who's a CMO in a British SaaS company, and they've just implemented kind of new data modeling, and they're taking much more of a kind of multi-touch approach. And he was saying that every single close one in his Q1 this year, every single one had multiple social media touch points, something they hadn't been able to see before. They always suspected it. And I think this is probably true for most B2B companies. There will be multiple social media touch points in the journey where someone comes and checks out your LinkedIn page. They might go to your CEO's LinkedIn page or a salesperson LinkedIn page. And then they go off and they Google, and, it's people take a long time in this kind of consideration phase, where you become a memorable brand to them. And the more you can kind of quantify that and understand that journey, which is never ever linear, right? We need to get rid of this kind of conceptual idea that you have the tofu or bofu and then never, right? So exactly, the more data you have and the more you can combine this data, the more important it is. And if you're not able to do it, do the social anyways, because we know that dark social is what the real conversations, the important decision-making conversations are happening, whether you can track it or not.
Yes, exactly. I also think it's so important, as you said, that there's so many different touch points on social, and that in itself is proving the value on social media on converting more customers. And it's so important to not have this sitting in a silo, like use it. Even seeing that a prospect's engaged with maybe your executive's LinkedIn post, look at what that topic is, because that can inform your next conversation, and they'll feel like you understand their needs and you can guide them to a purchasing decision that's right for them as well. So it's really important. I have one more question for you to wrap up. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights on social. So considering all this information that you've so kindly shared with us, what is the best piece of social media advice that you've ever been given?
Probably that whether you're a social media manager or a community manager, strategist, whatever it is, whatever kind of sector product you work on, be an editor, right? That's the kind of mindset you have to take on that, sort of take on the voice of your audience, right? That's who you advocate for. It's not about kind of publishing content that works for your company or getting stuff out because they've produced it. It's always, the audience always comes first and last, right? What is right for them? What would they find engaging? What would they find interesting? And everything else, it's kind of your job to get rid of and kind of advocate for them and always see things through their eyes. I think that's probably the best advice, because it's so true. Social is just all about the audience and the people, and you do good social for them, not for your company.
Exactly. I think it's such good advice, because sometimes you get wrapped up in, oh, I need to post this for my company and I need to post
Yeah,
this,
completely.
but it might not resonate with your audience. And at the end of the day, you need it to resonate with your audience for your social to be successful. So it's really amazing advice. Thank you so much for coming on this episode with me,
Thank
and
you.
sharing everything you had to say. I love your passion for social selling and employee advocacy. That's what we love to hear about here, because we really believe in its potential. So thank you again so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.